Good evening. You're tuning in to AWANI Tonight with me, Farhana Sheikh. Malaysia sees a record-breaking daily COVID-19 new cases today. And Selangor says any form of lockdown is up to Putrajaya. That's coming up. Malaysia reported 6,075 new COVID-19 cases in the last 24 hours, the highest ever since pandemic began. Selangor made up more than one-third of infections with 2,251 cases, followed by 699 in Johor and 660 in Kuala Lumpur. In the same 24-hour span, 46 more deaths related to COVID-19 were reported. The federal government should not justify implementing a full lockdown in Selangor by citing the state's COVID-19 caseload. Selangor Task Force COVID-19 Chairman Datuk Seri Dr. Zulkifli Ahmad said, while the state's daily infections continue to outpace others over the past weeks, it is not the one most impacted by the virus. Dr. Zul said this is based on three key metrics that should be used by Putrajaya to determine the worst-hit areas. Selangor's infectivity rate, he explained, is 1.14, which is lower than 6 other states including Pahang, Sabah and Perak. Secondly, Selangor is 4th worst hit state in terms of cases per 100,000 population. The state with the highest rate is Kelantan, followed by Sarawak and Kuala Lumpur. Finally, Dr. Zul said Selangor is also 4th in the number of deaths per 1 million people, behind Sabah, Kuala Lumpur and Sarawak. He urged Datuk Seri Dr. Adam Baber to reconsider a full lockdown in Selangor. On Monday, the Health Minister and the Ministry were considering imposing a stepped-up MCO in Selangor, given its high caseload. However, in a press conference later, Selangor Menteri Besar Datuk Seri Amiruddin Shahri stressed that any form of containment measures involving the announcement of full lockdowns to curb the spread of COVID-19 rests solely on the authority of the federal government and National Security Council.
He added that the Selangor state government has remained firm in its stance that it will welcome the possibilities of a total lockdown with the hope that it will be implemented holistically. According to him, this is in line with what was highlighted by Dr. Zulkifli earlier, who explicitly stated that effective follow-up measures such as expediting vaccinations and mass testing on the population must follow suit in accordance with the state's existing capabilities to sustain any after-effects of a full lockdown.
Coordinating Minister for the National COVID-19 Immunization Programme, Khairi Jamaluddin, explained that the donation of 2 million doses of COVID-19 Sinovac vaccines from a private company offered to Penang is bogus. He urged for the parties involved to not politicise the government's effort in its vaccination programme. Khairi clarified this after checking with Sinovac and the company records in Hong Kong, which showed there were no dealings made with the private company and that the company does not exist. He added that the government welcomes donations of vaccines, but only through proper channels.
Sekiranya ada mana-mana pihak yang ingin membantu Malaysia, kerajaan negeri dengan menyumbangkan bekalan dos vaksin, saya mengalu-alukan. Tetapi ia mestilah mengikut saluran yang ditetapkan. Vaksin ini adalah satu barang yang dikawal. Ini bukan beli t-shirt di Shopee. Ini beli vaksin yang perlu kepada kelulusan MPRA, yang perlu kepada kelulusan regulatory untuk kita bawa masuk ke sini. Jadi bagi saya ingin tegaskan bahawa berdasarkan pemeriksaan kami dalam isu ini, tawaran sumbangan 2 juta dos vaksin kepada Pulau Pinang ini adalah tidak sahih. This is bogus.
Yesterday, Penang Chief Minister Chow Kon Yeow urged Putrajaya to allow the state government to accept a donation of 2 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines from a private company. Chow said the private company had offered to donate 2 million doses of Sinovac, the COVID-19 vaccine from China, back in February, adding that the State Secretary had officially written to the Health Ministry's Secretary General for approval to accept the donated vaccine.
Meanwhile, Penang Chief Minister Chow Kon Yeow responded by demanding the company, who purportedly offered to donate 2 million Sinovac doses to the state, to come forward and explain themselves. Chow said that the state government has done its responsibility as best as possible in this issue, as the offer of vaccines can be given to the people of Penang to protect them from COVID-19. He added that the company and the company's director named by the minister should come forward to respond to the accusations.
Yesterday, we discussed how private universities are heavily impacted due to the pandemic as enrollment declined. While this signals trouble for its survivability, CEO of Cosmopoint Colleges, Najmi Nordin, says a drop in the number of higher education institutions in the country may in turn improve the overall quality for higher education institutions.
I think the numbers that we have, the ratio that we have over our population is a bit higher than what they have in Korea, for example. So there is room for institutions to close down. I think the level of competitiveness is too high at the moment, and it's good for the overall quality if you see some of the lesser quality institutions drop out. Unfortunately, at the same time, what it does, the pandemic has also caused the bigger institutions, the one that's always tried to maintain a certain level of quality, to have a significant drop in revenue. Now, this has led to reduction in the number of staffs, the payment that we pay to our staffs, part-timers, etc., or even investment into research and development or improving new programs would probably be impacted by this sudden drop in revenue.
He noted, although the effect on higher education quality may be beneficial in the long run, the current ripple effects from the pandemic era learning towards the graduates remain unclear.
Long term is good, but for the decline to happen significantly over a course of 1 or 2 years, that will have long-term repercussions in terms of the amount of investment that you can put in at the moment towards improving the quality of the programs, the student experience, for example. So I'm not too sure what the impact will be when the students from the cohort of 2019, for example, who will be graduating with half of their education online in 2023 or 2022. So that will play a part in the quality of graduates coming out and also the quality of the institutions.
We'll take a short break. Stay with us.
Why do you love the game?
Well, they're bringing goals to the Premier League. This game never ceases to amaze you.
Cross-border rocket fire on Wednesday. Despite international calls to end more than a week of violence, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reiterated the attacks will continue for as long as it takes. On Tuesday night, 52 Israeli aircraft struck Hamas tunnels in the southern Gaza Strip, while some 50 rockets were fired from Gaza. As of today, 217 Palestinians have been killed and more than 1,400 wounded, while 12 were killed in Israel since clashes began on May 10. The UN General Assembly is expected to discuss the violence on Thursday. Meanwhile, protests against Israel's bombardment of Gaza continued in many parts of the world. In Washington, D.C., hundreds of pro-Palestinian protesters demonstrated outside the Israeli embassy, demanding an end to Israeli airstrikes in the Gaza Strip. At one point during the protest, demonstration leaders read the names of those killed in the Israeli airstrikes. In Chile, hundreds of protesters, many of them Palestinians, formed a protest convoy in Santiago to show their support for Palestinians. Protesters gathered in their cars and drove slowly down a highway, honking their horns and waving the Palestinian flags. In Jordan, security forces prevented protesters from reaching the Israeli embassies in Amman. On Monday, all Jordanian parliament members called on the government to evict Israelis' ambassadors to Jordan and recall back Amman's diplomat to Israel. They also called for abolishing the peace accord that Jordan and Israel signed in 1994. How do we hold Israel accountable for their actions? Israeli author and Palestinian rights activist Miko Pellet said the most effective way is to boycott, divest and sanction movement against Israel. He says there is more urgency now for citizens to step up pressure on their respective governments to boycott Israel as the international community has failed to protect Palestinians.
I believe the key that we have, particularly those of us who live, people who live on the outside of Palestine, is to demand that our politicians support, boycott, demand sanctions, and demand divestment from the State of Israel. This, I believe, is key to the success of the struggle to liberate Palestine from this violent, racist regime, which is the State of Israel. Well, the international community has been completely either silent or complicit. I mean, the Europeans, the Americans are complicit in this. In these crimes. And so I think what needs to be done is people of conscience throughout the world need to demand of their governments to stop doing business with Israel. And Malaysia, for example, of course, has no relations with Israel, but we know that there's a lot of business being done with Israeli companies. That has to stop. And certainly Malaysian jobs, people rely on jobs with Israeli companies, but this has to stop. Israel has got to be punished in a way that they will never be able to do this again. This slaughter in Gaza, the treatment of Palestinians throughout the entire country here has I believe always has been far above and beyond what should be acceptable. But particularly now, I mean, it's time to stand up. It's time to boycott. It's time to demand sanctions against the State of Israel. There must be an arms embargo. There should be no sales of arms to Israel. Absolutely no weapons at all should reach this country. There should be a no-fly zone over Gaza, so Israel will not be allowed to continue to bomb Gaza from the air. I mean, the world has got to stand up and act, or else we will see Al-Aqsa destroyed, we will see Jerusalem destroyed, and we will see the people of Gaza murdered by the thousands. And I'm not exaggerating. You're asking about the end game. The end game is there's going to be a winner and a loser. And if the world stands up, then Palestinians will be the winners. If the world does not stand up, Palestinians will be the losers. Israel will win. And if Israel wins, that means that Al-Aqsa will be destroyed. It means the beautiful golden dome of Jerusalem that represents Jerusalem will be destroyed and replaced by some other structure that they call a temple. I don't think it is, but that's what they call it.
The humanitarian crisis in Gaza continues to worsen, with water and food running out, hospitals overwhelmed. Tonight on Consider This, we ask our panelists what we can do to help. That is all we have for you on AWANI tonight. Get the latest news update on COVID-19 and COVID-19 vaccines from astroawani.com and Astro AWANI app. I'm Farhana Sheikh. We'll see you again.
Polis Petaling Jaya mengesahkan penemuan mayat seorang wanita yang dikatakan jatuh dari tingkat 4 di pusat beli belahuan utama pada Rabu. Polis Kuantan menahan 7 lelaki terlibat dengan kes kecurian mesin Bitcoin bernilai RM50,000 di Sungai Karang Pantai pada jam 3 pagi Rabu. Sebagai usaha untuk mendapatkan insentif pakej rangsangan ekonomi, wujud majikan yang telah menggunakan data pekerja bagi memperoleh dana penjana kerjaya 2.0.
Khabar baik untuk semua rakyat B40. Dengan Yes Prihatin belajar dari rumah, Yes memberikan telefon pintar percuma dan data percuma. Tiada deposit, tiada kontrak, tiada bayaran. Ini memang milik anda. Tuntut sekarang di yes.my/kasih-up B40.
Hello and good evening.